This must be a pretty good fight, Jim. I've already got 5 dots of blood on my shirt. And it's Pavlik's blood.
Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier! Down goes Frazier!
Should be the round of the century.
Look at Holyfield! What a warrior!
If he weighs 205, his heart weighs about 204.
It happened! It happened! I can't believe it. That was astonishing, and he hurts him with a hook. Corrales comes back to straight right. Now Castillo against the ropes. Unbelievable. Evan Flow. Corrales waiting. Castillo's in trouble. Leak steps in, and the fight is over. Corrales with a remarkable dramatic turnaround to win this fight.
If he gets up, he probably wins the fight. I can't believe it!
Unbelievable! Richard Steele stopped the fight with fewer than 5 seconds to go. You're going to watch Lou Duba go crazy now. You're going to watch Lou Duba go absolutely berserk.
Well, hello everybody and welcome to another edition of Punches from the Past. I'm Steve Wellings and I'm joined once again this week by Dave Lee, Andy Patterson and Kurt Ward. We've covered a fair few fights already, guys. If you'd listened to last week's episode, you'll have been enthralled by the Withenshaw battle between Carl Thompson and Ezra Sellers. But we're going slightly off the radar a little bit and over to the Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City, New Jersey this week from September the 29th, 2007, where Jermain Taylor and Kelly Pavlik clashed for the WBC and WBO World Middleweight titles. Jermain Taylor undefeated, as was his challenger. A real clash of the ages, an absolutely superb fight. I believe Dave Lee's going to lead us in to tell us exactly what was going on in the lead up to this super fight.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. As you mentioned, the fight took place on September 29, 2007 at the Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City. It was for the WBC and WBO middleweight titles, and I think the ring belt was also on the line.
Yeah, lineal title.
Yeah, lineal title. Taylor was coming off some fairly insipid performances, against the likes of Corey Spinks and Kasim Uma, two much smaller opponents who you would have thought Taylor would have dealt with quite decisively, and he seemed to get somewhat of a fortunate draw against Winky Wright. So not coming into the fight with a lot of confidence. I mean, he'd beaten Hopkins twice, but neither victories were what you could call really conclusive. So he was still a man still searching for that star-making performance. I have a theory as well that in the first Hopkins fight, when Taylor was hurt and wobbled late in that fight, I think that took something out of Taylor mentally as well. After that, I don't know, maybe it's just me. He never looked to have the same assuredness, swagger that he had early on in his career. And after the Hopkins fight, he looked to be a fighter, always on edge, he always had this kind of tense stance about him. And I think that can explain a lot of the stamina issues he was having later in his career because, of course, nervous energy can, drain you. So, I think it was the first time he ever faced real adversity in the Hopkins fight. And I don't know, maybe he just took something out of him mentally, just a theory. But, Taylor was, he was being groomed for superstardom by HBO. I mean, he was a bronze medalist at the Sydney Olympics. I remember the first time watching him was on the undercard of the Hopkins Eastman show when he stopped Daniel Edward in the third round. And he looked the business, he looked a natural athlete. And that was important because he didn't actually like boxing at all. He wasn't a fan of the sport, never read a boxing magazine, and famously, before the Pavlik fight, he didn't even know what belts he had, because he had lost the WBA title and the IBF title from Hopkins, but he'd lost both of them in the meantime, and he didn't even know what belts he had. He just didn't follow the sport at all. But he was a natural athlete, and because of that, whatever career he would have chosen, his natural athleticism meant he was going to have reasonable success no matter what. And boxing was just happened to be the sport he chose. Emmanuel Stewart came on board as Taylor's chief coach after the Hopkins rematch, but I think it's fair to say the two never really had much of a rapport. Stewart was making a lot of noises before the Pavlik fight that Kelly was overrated, and he actually had kind of a dig at his trainer Jack Lowe as well, saying that he wasn't a proper trainer. But the difference was Pavlik had been with Lowe since the age of 9, I believe, and those two had a very close relationship. Lowe understood Pavlik's psyche, which is very important for a trainer. Think of Peter Fury and Tyson Fury. They understand each other, and that's very important. Stewart, on the other hand, I don't think really understood Taylor, and by all accounts, he wasn't really in the gym either training Taylor. I think that was left up to the co-trainer Ozil Nelson, and who had replaced Taylor's a long-time trainer Pat Burns. And by all accounts, there was a school of thought that Nelson was in the gym with Taylor, but he wasn't really pushing Taylor as hard as Pat Burns used to, which could also explain the stamina issues, which were starting to rear their head.
A bit like the Hamed and Stewart link up, I'd say. A bit like bringing
Absolutely.
him on because he's, the big name. The guy's got bigger than his boots now, and he's missed the big time, and he's got to get the big time trainer when it doesn't really gel, and he should have stuck with the guy who actually got him there in the first place.
Absolutely. Do you know what? You know what he is? What he was at that stage, I think, and not to insult Manuel Stewart, because one of the top trainers of all time, but I think at that stage he was like a hired gun, wasn't he? People
like Freddie Roach now.
Like Freddie Roach now, and I think with Taylor he was like a de facto trainer. He wasn't doing the groundwork. He was just showing up for the fights and giving the spiel in the corners, but he wasn't really in the gym doing the hard training with fighters. I mean, at the time as well, he had a big gig with HBO, so that took up most of his time. And going back to the fight, I can't remember the odds, but I think it was pretty much even money, with Taylor perhaps being the slight favourite. Because I think the feeling going into the fight was that while Pavlik had shown vulnerabilities in the past, particularly against Zuniga, and that great fight with Edison Miranda, which he was coming off the back of going into this fight, he was a fighter that seemed to be improving with each fight, whereas Taylor actually appeared to be regressing, even under Manny Stewart. So the stage was set for a classic, and I think that's what we got.
It's just like, just to add a wee bit making a background as well, just to add what Dave was saying, these two actually had met as amateurs back in 2000 at the Olympic trials. Pavlik only had been a 17-year-old kid, where I think Taylor had a 3 or 4 year age advantage on him as well. I think Taylor won the
21, wasn't he, Andy? I
think Taylor won the fight 11-5 and got a decision, and as Dave said, he went on to get an Olympic bronze. That said, again, just mentioning it about Jack Lowe. I mean, Dave's right. Manny Stewart was basically making comments about him. Those comments would come back as well after Pavlik lost to Hopkins. But as Dave quite like to say again, he was with him since the age of 9. Gave him everything he had basically. And the thing with Pavlik was when coming up through the ranks at the time, he was facing okay, no great opposition, but solid opposition. It was the fact is, it was the manner in which he was actually destroying these opponents. People were starting to take notice that this guy may have something to offer. And the thing with Taylor is, as well, as if you go back and look at his two defences after Hopkins leading into the actual Pavlik fight, to get two fighters that actually look awful against, they went out and picked the two best opponents for that case. Uma, we all know, has got the chain of God. He gave him absolute a torrid time in that fight against Taylor. And I think it was that fight. That fight was at the Spinks fight that Manny Stewart was losing his shit with Taylor, saying like, you're not throwing the punches. You need to let these punches go. I think Uma's come up from like 154 for that fight. I think Spinks was best weight was running about 154 as well, coming up in weight or whatever. But going into that fight, I just think maybe. Okay, Taylor was kind of classed as a superstar, or was getting built into being a superstar, I should say. But going into that fight, it was more to do with the fact that could he actually even defend his title? Could he actually come out of that fight actually, as still the champion? Because Pavlik got in there, had a lot of momentum, he had a lot of big knockouts, And the other thing as well is both were undefeated, but I just think that Pavlik just kind of rose to the occasion that night, whereas Taylor, it's all said again, the old gas tank kind of caught them in the end.
Yeah, I think you're actually right, Andy. I think their careers, even though they were both undefeated at the time, their careers were, I wouldn't say moving in different directions, but Pavlik was definitely on the ascendancy, as you say. He had some very good wins against the likes of Zuniga, Bronco McCart, very tough, experienced competitor. Lennon Pierre, big punching, very vulnerable, expected knockout, but it was really the Edison Miranda knockout when Pavlik got rid of him so impressively that people really started to sit up and take notice. It was an eliminator for the WBC title as well. And HBO back in the day were in the business of pushing these fights. They really wanted these type of fights, and they pushed it on. And Taylor, like you said, he was in a bit of a tough spot at the time. I always think that getting rid of Pat Burns was a mistake. It took him so far. He was the humble kid from Arkansas. You remember Bill Clinton turning up to the Hopkins fight. Pat Burns was there, the old experienced hand. And Taylor, it was just starting to show that his maybe mental capacity wasn't all quite as it should be. And, I'm not saying he was flipping stupid or anything like that, but he was just...
Yes, look at him there.
The demons were starting to show. Now, saying that, both of these guys are people who've retired and showed great vulnerabilities outside of the ring. That's no real mark on them as men, but Taylor was really starting to lose his shit, as you would say, Andy, at this point. I think during the fight he was doing a lot of erratic things out of the ring, and he hadn't looked impressive, had he? Was it the Winky Wright fight? I think that a lot of us thought that he'd even lost that fight, and against Speaks, it was terrible.
Yeah, it was an awful fight. I forget which fight it was. I don't know if anybody can remind me, but one of the fights was Stewart and the Spinks.
Spinks fight, yeah.
Aye, I've never seen Stewart that animated since Klitschko fought that's the one. No, it was when he knocked the guy out late, mate, in the 11th round or 12th round.
Chambers, yeah.
Chambers, that was the one.
But it actually reminded me, Andy, of Stewart in the corner against Lennox Lewis when he fought Tyson. I remember when kind of Lewis was kind of
a dead man in front of you, he said, or something.
Yeah, Lewis was kind of toying with Tyson around the 4th, 5th round, and Stewart just reverted back to Reed Street ghetto talk, didn't he? It's like, get this fucker out of here, otherwise this guy's going to catch you with some crazy shit. And he was going through the same spiel with Taylor against Spinks. He just wasn't throwing punches. He looked to be kind of hypnotised by Spinks' style.
For me, I mean, these two are, two of the most overrated fighters, really, of the last how many years. Because that's not saying they're not good fighters or anything, but I think Taylor it was all thrust upon him to be this next star. I think looking back now, he clearly got Bernard Hopkins at the very end of his 160 run when he was really struggling with the weight, and it's debatable. I mean, people still say Hopkins they thought won the fights. An argument could be made that Jermain Taylor lost 3 fights in a row, twice with Bernard Hopkins. I think Winky Wright definitely beat him. And then he just seemed, once he got to the big star that he always believed he was or was told he was, it's like he looked at these guys like Corey Spinks, Kazim Uma, like they weren't on his level, and he looked dire in those fights, and he got a lot of criticism after those fights, and that criticism ended up, in my opinion, costing him the fight against Pavlik, because he seemed to go into this fight against a tall, rangy guy, pretty, as I said, a pretty one-dimensional guy, and very overrated himself, but very hard man, and who punched very hard as well, and was very hungry for the win and the title and the fame and what that would bring. And I think in with all that criticism he had, he wanted to make a big statement, and he thought he'd really be too much for Pavlik. And I think at the time I'd say exactly the same. I think he'd be too fast, too athletic. I think with Jermain Taylor, because he was so athletic, people confuse that with, he's a great boxer. And I think he was found out many times. And in this fight, I mean, that second round, no matter what anyone says about Kelly Pavlik, you got to say, for him to get through that second round and go on after that, it's incredible, because he looked absolutely all over the place.
He took some shots, didn't he, Kurt, in that round?
And this is another fight where you got to thank that Steve Smoger is referee again, because Kelly Pavlik owes him, because a lot of referees might have just said that's enough. I mean, there's a slow-mo replay of the 3-punch combination Taylor hit him with, and the last left hits him just flush right in the face. And it's incredible that he carried on, and a lot of wrestlers just said, no, you're not even defending yourself. But he got through it, and Kelly Pavlik, I mean, a very, very tough man.
Because he
you,
started unloading. He started unloading Taylor in that, after that first knockdown, actually, and then I think he caught Pavlik again with a right hand. It was like Bambi on ice right across the ring. But Pavlik, as you say, mate, he hung on. He smothered the work and he survived the round. But Pavlik on wobbly legs going back to that corner.
Yeah, as we mentioned last week, we can just thank our lucky stars that we had, Steve Smorgon refereeing this fight, because I think it's fair to say any other ref could have stopped Pavlik in that round, and I don't think there would have been too many complaints, because Pavlik, as you mentioned, all over the place, all at sea, didn't know where he was. Chin up, hands down, wasn't throwing back, getting caught clean. But Taylor, I think he almost, probably did as well, shot his bolt in that round, didn't he?
He says when he was an amateur, he was more boxer and stylist than big puncher. It's a good right hand there, twice over. He's bent the knees at Pavlik. Pavlik's hurt. He's open. Taylor's going for him here. Can he take him out? Big crisis. Pavlik could be beaten here. In the second round, he goes down and gets up a bit too quickly. Oh my goodness, he's in trouble now. Mandatory 8.
He made a mistake getting up so early. The legs are still wobbly.
Long time to go in the round as well. We're only halfway through it. Taylor here can come up with a spectacular win. How can Pavlik get through this? He's got to hold on. He's really got to hold on now. He's fighting through a fog. Taylor, another huge right. He's all over the place. The fight is on the verge of being stopped here.
Well, he's hanging on for dear life. Pavlik, he's got to try and clear the head. Don't give Taylor a clean shot.
He's got to hold on. Somehow get through the crisis. There's still 50 seconds in the round left. 50 seconds for Taylor to tee off with those big rights. Pavlik's finding out what it's like now at the top world level. And Taylor is answering his critics here in spectacular fashion so far.
Yeah, good punches from Taylor. He's opening up, he's relaxed. This is the start he wanted.
Pavlik finds the wherewithal somehow in his crisis to throw a couple of right hands. He's 20 seconds away from that bow. He needs it so very, very badly.
Taylor looks as if he's momentarily punched himself out in this round. Thrown a lot of punches.
Sensational round. We're going to get the bell any second. Against the odds, Kelly Pavlik has somehow, don't ask me how, got through it and totters back to his corner. Just about. Is the minute going to be long enough then?
He did, because if you look at, see if you start the third round, Pavlik came out strong, so obviously the recuperative powers were far better than Taylor, as you say. Perhaps, maybe, I think you might have alluded to in the commentary, might have punched himself out.
Yeah. I think it's as well, Andy, Pavlik was known for really extreme conditioning, wasn't he?
Yeah,
I think I remember ringside back in the day showing him his training regimen. Really, really strict training regimen. Really put his body to work.
I think his mum and dad basically controlled his diet as well. I mean, you think about it, this guy came from a town of 92,000 people, and they created fighters like Boom Boom Mancini, Jeff Lampkin, who got erased off Duran, and Harry Arroyo. There was Greg Richardson as well, I think, who fought Jockey Hero. Some good fighters from.
Yeah, I was going to say
the whole of Youngstown apparently just basically shut down whenever Pavlik fought. I mean, he was just so revered, wasn't he?
Yeah, they loved him. That's what I was going to say. Actually, David, the atmosphere was absolutely superb, and it was actually Taylor who came racing out early. He seemed buoyed by the atmosphere, throwing a lot of shots. But what you were saying was interesting about Pavlik. He was super fit. He was well conditioned. We all knew that. Wasn't it strange? Emmanuel Stewart was saying as early as the first round in the corner, he kept saying he's going to tire. He's going to tire. I wonder why he kept on saying that over and over again throughout the fight.
I think that was more to ease Jermain Taylor, because I think he probably sort of knew what everyone else probably knew, that he's got that same thing that John Pascal's got. He just looks like he's worried that he's not going to be able to do the distance, or he's going to start fading, and he's questioning his own gas tank. And I just think with Jermain Taylor, he's got that jittery style again, that he's just nervous about his energy. And maybe Manny was like trying to say, he's tiring, as if, even though in his mind he knew he wasn't, but just trying to ease Jermain a bit, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Throughout his career, Taylor always faded at the end of fights, didn't he? Big ones, anyway.
Well, it's like what I mentioned earlier on. I think that tense style of his really burnt a lot of nervous energy. I mean, you look at, I mean, even someone like Greatest Prescott, the exact same, wasn't he? You know, had that tense style, and when you're that tense and you're not relaxed, as you get into the later rounds, all that nervous energy, you know, it burns out of you. And you know, we were talking
Yeah,
about Pavlik, we're talking about Pavlik's conditioning as well. It's interesting to know that when, as the
For foot
aforementioned
all the time.
rings, yeah, but you know, ringside's piece, which I mentioned there, they showed, you know, Pavlik's training regimen. It was all old school training, you know, lifting tires, chopping trees, you
Hmm.
know, none of this like sports science milkshakes, all this cobblers, you know, real old school training stuff that the likes of your Jack Dempsey's and Marcianos would have done, and you know, it stood him in good stead in this fight, definitely.
It wasn't what I would call a absolute muscle, you know, a muscle bound, ripped middleweight. I mean, he was a big dude for middleweight. I think he was like
Oh yeah,
6'2", 6'3", but he wasn't clearly defined. You know, he wasn't cut.
no,
But as you say, but his regimen was second to none. I mean, as I say,
I
his mum and dad controlled his diet, what he ate, what he, you know, if he was training, they would kick his arse, get out and train and stuff. And
That's correct. Yeah, I remember him saying that as well. Like, you know, whenever he woke up and he wasn't in the mood to train, they'd basically give him a kick up the backside. Come on, you're training for the title there. Get up and start training. So you know, that stood him in good stead as well. You know, you know, definitely he hit such a large frame for a middleweight, didn't he? I mean, I remember the first time I saw Pavlik was on the undercard of the Hopkins De La Hoya fight back in 2004, and
yeah.
that was up at super middleweight, and I thought even then watching him, I said, "Jesus, this guy's freakishly tall for a super middleweight. He's going to have to move up to light heavy." But he actually moved down to middleweight. I mean, how he made that, I don't know, but you know,
maybe that's why he's also cutting so defined, mate, because he's cutting himself down to middleweight, down to middleweight. That's maybe then hampered him at kind of like build muscle.
yeah, that's definitely a point. Yeah,
Yeah,
Uh,
that's an interesting point. Actually, I was going to say, I remember seeing him fight. I think I was actually at that show. I remember seeing Pavlik. That was the first time I'd seen him, and he was quite laboured in that performance. I wasn't expecting any great things from him, but he obviously went on. And I think mentioning the fitness side of things is interesting because in and around one of our previous punches from the past, when we were talking about Sanchez and Nelson, we said it at the time, didn't we, guys? You know, there's a lot to be said for this sports science and all this these days. You've got guys blowing out their arse after 6 or 7 rounds
yeah.
when they're doing all these machines and stuff. These guys are out chopping the trees, and you know it's a bit of an old cliche and everything. But there was, you know, same with Sanchez, 15 rounds. Pavlik there, he could have fought all night, and with no sports machine inside.
There's
Yeah.
an old saying, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So why they change all this, you know, sports science and all what I hear now, you know, and all this nonsense when, as I said, go back and watch the old timers. They're fighting 20, 25. Some fights were 45 rounders. I mean, you know, these guys are all hard men. They're fighting every week. What's different now? Why are they so different? Apparently they've got the best nutrition in the world now. All these other stuff they're getting, the sports science is so good. Yet these guys, some of them even do 12 rounds that they can't walk afterwards. I mean, so you got to look at it. Like, I just think it's with all sports, it's just a lot of nonsense, really. Just for people, the sports scientists, to get paid and create extra jobs for all these bogus things.
boxing is actually less sport and more science these days, anyway, mate.
But yeah, there's definitely something to be said for that, though. You know, I mean, Pavlik showed it in this fight. As getting back to the fight, as you mentioned, you know, Taylor looked a bit gassy in the third round, didn't he? And you know, one
He
thing
was
as well,
holding, wasn't he, as well? He was holding
told him a
quite a
lot,
lot.
yeah. One thing that doesn't get discussed enough in this fight, and I think it was so important for Pavlik, was the jab. The jab really busted Taylor up. You know,
Aye.
he stopped using it on occasion, but when he started to get it working again, as he did in the third round, you could tell it was really disrupting Taylor's rhythm and just busting him up.
Negative. Taylor. Pavlik here drives him back. Might have stung him with one of those.
Well, it's a good combination, body and head.
Listen to Pavlik's stance. Taylor, we're doing very little in this round. He's let Pavlik back into the contest.
And remember, he is a puncher, Pavlik.
The thing is, I think the main thing was that Pavlik was commanding the centre ring for the good portion of that fight. You know, Taylor was kind of more reduced to kind of fighting off the back foot, kind of like, you know, if he was on the ropes, he would actually kind of come firing back off the ropes, actually, Taylor, because he had to. You know, I think Taylor Stewart was basically telling him, didn't go on the ropes. But you got to give a shout out to the commentary team minus Lennox Lewis. Lennox Lewis was fucking awful in this fight.
See why he
Absolute
got
fucking.
sacked by HBO.
Was this a fight, mate?
No, but it was his steady stream of HBO appearances that the fans just had enough and they
Oh.
came, didn't they?
He was. I'll actually come on to his comment for the stoppage. It was fucking horrible. But just going back to the third round, I think the Lamp play basically summarised to say that kind of Pavlik was, he'd gained upper hand and he's back the champion in the corner and he was tactically in control of the fight. I think after that round, Larry, they even shouted, didn't she?
Gentlemen, we have a fight.
Again, fourth round, Pavlik again, he's got Taylor backing up, he's going forward. I think Taylor got warned for a low blow at one point. Pavlik then got into him late, got into the ropes. And but as I say, Taylor managed to kind of bounce off those ropes. I think the fifth round was kind of slightly slower, even though Pavlik again was kind of starting to kind of push it on the right foot, kind of looking
Pavlik's
for the
nose was starting to bleed around a lot, wasn't it, Andy?
I think that came off the knockdown in the second round, though. I think, as I say, he's looking for the right hand over the top. It was more turning into kind of more of a boxing match. I thought around about the kind of fourth and fifth round, but then obviously.
There was some good work, though, wasn't there?
Yeah.
In fairness to Taylor, coming from Taylor, there was some good work. Fifth and sixth round especially.
Yeah.
I thought he was kind of at times befuddling Pavlik, and you've seen Pavlik's punches, and he was really letting his hands go and putting together some good combinations. But the problem was he was being forced to work at a pace he wasn't comfortable with. Yeah.
That was the thing, mate, because I think in the seventh round that he was forced to stand toe-to-toe with Pavlik at that point.
Yeah, and he was, and by that stage he was all in, wasn't he?
Yeah,
I agree. I actually made notes to that effect, Dave. Pretty much what you're saying there. Nice skills and combinations from Taylor, but I think it was the beginning of the sixth round. Really, to give Taylor his credit, he came out and he showed why. Started to show glimpses of why he was such a talked about fighter. I mean, we look back at Taylor now, and I remember quite a lot of the bad things, but he did have talent. He showed skills and he showed a lot of promise on the way up. And I think in that sixth round, he came out for the first couple of minutes and he showed real glimpses of ability and why people were so high on him at the time.
The natural talent was never in question, was it, Steve?
No.
He was always, as we mentioned earlier, naturally athletic, very athletically gifted. I think it was mentally there was big problems there, and we see it there today. Not to fast forward too much, but the slow transformation of Taylor over the years really has been startling. We mentioned it earlier on. Nice, humble young guy from Little Rock, Arkansas, and the guy we see today, it's not the same guy, is it?
I think in the fight, though, I think him hurting Pavlik as bad as he did, it was actually the worst thing to happen to Jermain Taylor, because one, he shot his bolt trying to get him out of there, and two, it gave Pavlik confidence. He was like, you've absolutely hit me with your best shots. I shouldn't be here, and yet still I am, and I'm still coming forward. And I don't know what that did mentally when we saw it in Jermain Taylor fights after this as well. The Carl Froch one is a perfect example that when if you look at this fight, Pavlik looked like a different weight class to Taylor. He had the size on him, and he was coming forward, making Taylor work at a pace he didn't want to. Even though Taylor was winning the rounds and was looking good, it was just like a mental pressure that Pavlik could take what he took and was still coming, and Pavlik was landing that right hand and it was starting to land. And I think, we won't know, but as a fighter, I think you can obviously feel the guy weakening. You can feel his shots aren't as powerful as well, or when he's holding a lot more and he hasn't got the strength to do it as much. And I just think Pavlik was getting more confidence, even though necessarily he wasn't winning the fight. And I think he knew he was going to have a moment where he could get Taylor. And one thing about Kelly Pavlik, he was a fantastic finisher. I mean, as soon as he had Taylor hurt, that was it. There was no messing about.
Clinical, wasn't it?
It was the beauty of boxing, because no other sport can change just like that. I mean, you can be ahead, you can win every minute of every round, and it can just change with one punch. And Pavlik shown that.
Yeah. I think
that finishing.
What do you go, Dave?
Oh yes, I was just going to say, I think that finishing sequence in the seventh round for me is one of the most memorable moments of the last decade. It's just, as you said, two right hands, Taylor stumbling into the corner, and as you mentioned, just so clinical. The follow-up shots, there was two cracking uppercuts, but then it was like this one slashing left to the temple, and you could just see that the energy almost just completely sapped from Taylor, and his whole body just collapsed in a heap. And the place just where it was an uproar, as you said, probably half of Youngstown was in the Boardwalk Convention Centre that night, and just such a memorable moment.
So far in this round, it's been enough.
There's that right hand. He gets through again. Taylor takes it all. He didn't take that one so well. Good right hand. And then a left uppercut. Taylor is in trouble for the first time. Pavlik's unloading. Taylor's going to have to be stopped. That fight is turned sensationally around. And Kelly Pavlik, out of nowhere, is the middleweight champion of the world. We have a sensation here in Atlantic City.
I think it's a good time actually to kind of bring in here as to how Lennox Lewis probably ended up losing his job at HBO because he actually failed to see the right hand that set it all up way maybe 10, 15, 20 seconds before the actual stoppage. Because if you look at the HBO, when they showed the replay, did they actually show the right hand that actually landed before it? But what happened was, it was a long right hand from Pavlik. It stung Taylor pretty badly. It seemed to root him to the spot, and it seemed to back off a little bit. And then Taylor went in again. Pavlik went in again on another right hand, put him in at the corner. You say there was a left hook in there. I think the final shot might have been an uppercut. That definitely there was a left hook in there involved somewhere. And Lennox Lewis says, I don't know where that shot that landed that actually hurt him. How the fuck did you not see it, Lennox? It doesn't matter. Smoker, again, this is why I love Smoker, right? When he was at his prime, because that fight, anywhere else would have been stopped as soon as Taylor went in that corner and took the left hook. But being the champion, again, the champion deserves every respect. Smoker gave it to him. He could have stepped in maybe 2 or 3 seconds beforehand, but he wanted to see what Taylor had left. And he didn't have anything. He folded to his knees, and the right thing was done. He waved the fight off. Great finish. I did think, as Kurt says, if Pavlik had you in the hook, you were finished.
Yeah,
he was a great finisher.
Killer instinct was just superb. I think it was just the swiftness of the finish for me. It was like they were competing on more or less even terms, and then all of a sudden that right hand lands, and before you know it, Pavlik's in for the kill. So quickly, and he's finished him off. Just brilliantly accurate shots. He picked every shot really nice, and absolutely superb finish from Pavlik, definitely. And afterwards, I was very impressed with him in the post-fight interview as well. He sounded like his nose was busted up a bit, but he just sounded like a nice, deferent guy. Hadn't really got anything bad to say about Taylor, and it was just a nice thing all there.
It's funny you mention that, Steve, because it is, I forget who mentioned about him being a nice guy, and he heard me mention Boom Boom Mancini. He gave a lot of shout out to those guys after that fight.
Yeah.
But then, if you remember, I think it was maybe a few years back. Obviously, Pavlik's got some issues with alcohol and stuff like that. He then started shitting on Boom Boom Mancini, who was probably trying to kind of reach out to him and try and help him. But it just shows you.
Yeah.
We talked about Taylor's transformation. I think the same can be said to Pavlik. He's got his own personal demons, and unfortunately, he doesn't seem to be conquering them. It's quite sad as well, because I was convinced after this fight that boxing had a new star. I mean, especially as well. I mean, the Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City. I mean, it was famously called the house the house that Gaddy built. Exactly, Andy. And a couple of months before this fight, Carlos Baldemir, unfortunately, put paid to Gaddy's career effectively. Obviously, he had that last fight against Gomez, which is tragic, but the Baldemir fight really eliminated Gaddy from world title contention. And it looked like as you mentioned earlier on, the atmosphere on that night for Taylor Pavlik was absolutely sensational, and all the fans, American fans, traditionally they don't travel for fighters, but Youngstown travelled to watch Pavlik, and it looked like Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City had a new star in Kelly Pavlik. But as we mentioned, didn't really pan out that way, unfortunately.
I wonder how those people from Youngstown actually afforded to manage to go there, because there's no industry out there. As I say, it's a product of the steel mines that are actually all shut now as well. Yeah. So massive unemployment in that area.
You got to look at the two fighters as well. Their careers. I mean, when he beat Bernard Hopkins, you think the middleweight has got a young, a talented kid now who can be the next star after getting rid of the aging middleweight champion. And it didn't work out. Obviously, we talked about Taylor's poor defense where he didn't look good. But exactly the same we said about Kelly Pavlik. I mean, now again, he's just dethroned Taylor, and again, you think this guy's going to be a star. He's got a crowd behind him. He's brought excitement to this division now after years of Hopkins boring everyone and Jermain Taylor not doing too well. But he's reign as well. If you look at it, I mean, Gary Lockett, then the terrible fight against Hopkins where he decided to move up to 170. And, that was the end of him, but even then he still fought Rubio and Espino, was it? And he just, like Jermain Taylor, his reign was really just, it didn't work at all. And it was sad how two guys there who should have really gone on to do more in the sport just seemed to, after reaching the top, a bit like Riddick Bowe, after reaching the top, what else was there for them to achieve? For some fighters, the greats, they carry on and they want to do more and more. Some fighters, they win it and then what else can they do?
Even the rematch, Kurt, Pavlik didn't really look that impressive, did he? I mean, I know it was at a catch weight, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was strange, wasn't it? It was a pre-agreed thing, wasn't it?
164 or 165?
165 or 66, I think.
Was there no talk also about Pavlik facing Calzaghe at one point around about this time?
Well, there was, yeah. I mean, definitely.
And Arthur Abraham was the big fight that people wanted as well. But
Yeah, I remember that.
Great
Yeah,
fight.
remember that one as well, mate. And Paul Williams, I remember him being running about that weight at the time as well.
Because Calzaghe Kessler was the next week or so, wasn't it? Because during the broadcast they were going down on all these the countdown to Barrera, Pacquiao 2, the countdown to Cotto Mosley, Calzaghe Kessler's next week. You're watching Pavlik Taylor. For me, it was halcyon days, wasn't it?
That's what I say, man. You know, fucking, there's none of that PBC shit where you get like the guys. I mean, if you look at some of the pay-per-view shows we get nowadays and stuff, you know, some of the betting is absolutely like wide as you can get. Some of those fights were 50-50, you just mentioned there.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Paul Williams, because I remember at the time there was talks of Pavlik ducking Williams. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, there was also talk about Pavlik ducking Abraham as well, because he was going to Germany and that.
Yeah, they did sign to fight though, didn't they, Pavlik and Williams? But Pavlik got the staph infection and he had to pull out of the fight, and then they said he was ducking.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, the injury was legit. He was going to fight Williams, and obviously Williams got knocked out by Sergio Martinez, and you know Pavlik fought him next, and you know lost. But in that fight, I actually thought he was doing pretty well, and he was pretty even fight, but then he suffered that bad cut, and Sergio took it away from him.
I remember that. You reminded me, Kurt. I remember Pavlik showed a photo of that infection. It looked pretty bad, didn't it?
Aye, staph infection.
Yeah.
And that would have been another really interesting fight, because you know Pavlik's the puncher against Paul Williams, big guy threw a lot of punches. That would have been a really good fight as well. As something like Pavlik Abraham.
Was he fitting glass or something, and the glass poured through his arm or something, and he got an infection or something like that? I remember at the time. Can't really remember, but it was a really bad injury.
Saying that though, I forget it was you, Dave, that maybe mentioned about, you know, how tragic, maybe it was you, Steve, how tragic their lives have probably turned out. You know, we know what happened to Taylor as well. I mean, if you think about, you know, what he did after that fight, you know, he was at the ring for, I think it was about 10 months. He fought Jeff Lacey, then obviously he got the chance to the world title against Carol Froch, well in front, on 2 of the scorecards at least, and then gets knocked out in the 12th round, stopped by 12th round, and then, you know, I mean, the Abraham was brutal. I mean, that's probably one of the most brutal knockouts you'll see.
Top of the head, wasn't it?
I mean, he was on the ground for ages, and you know, I think his wife was at ringside that night, and his whole family in Germany, and he's basically shouting, "Jermain, get up! You're playing. You're just playing." No, sweetheart, he wasn't just playing. He's been rewired, and to be honest, I say the word rewired with a bit of respect, because if you look at what he's been doing nowadays, going about with guns and letting off, getting arrested for letting off an AK-47 or an M16 recently, or an Uzi weapon, and
he was sectioned, wasn't he, as well, briefly? So I mean, it's just both these fighters have had demons. You know, it's the way Jermain Taylor's. You know, as you said, you know, he wasn't this brash, arrogant guy. You know, like an Adrian Broner type. He was a humble kid, and it seemed like the fame and more so the money, you know, changed him a little bit, and you know, maybe he started hanging around with different people, and he got too big for his boots, and now we see him, you know, it's sad the way he's gone. And I think he's problem with alcohol, and you know, after he's lost to Sergio Martinez, his retirements, coming back maybe, and you know, seeing him go out against, you know, Alfonso Lopez and Will Wazinski and these top fighters, and then him just no doubt he's still got problems, you know, with the drink as well. And it's just a shame both of these guys how it turned out for them.
Yeah, he was being lined up to fight Buhe, wasn't he, at one stage, and I think he pulled out and announced his retirement.
Yeah, I remember as well, he was very scathing of the Super 6 tournament, which I was a big supporter of, actually, saying that, you know, these guys are fighting, you know, okay, they're fighting the best, but they're fighting for like $500,000. By this point, you know, I think Pavlik at this point was actually, he'd lost to Hopkins, he'd lost to Martinez by that point as well. You know, the Super 6 was running about 2009, 2010, so really, it would have been an ideal opportunity maybe if he was going to move up in weight, if he shipped stuff together to actually get involved in that tournament and try and keep his career going, because if you look at who he fought, Jesse Nicklow, Khalid Trouts, Raul Munez, Juan Candelio, Sam talking about Taylor here, talking about sure we mentioned Pavlik, sorry. He fought Lopez, Jaco, Scott Sigmund and Will Rosinski. You know, who are these guys, you know? So it'd have been a shame. It'd been a good addition to that tournament.
It's just the Abraham fight. Just I remember, every week and Steve Brunson, on his show, they would talk about it. It's just a strange fight where you just think it seems so obvious to me. Both undefeated guys, both big punchers, both hold titles. Why not make the fight? I mean, Abraham had been to America. He's been after that fight as well. I know both don't want to concede the ground, but I'm sure it was pretty obvious that the fight would have to be an American. I don't understand why it never happened, but that would have been a really fun fight. Two guys who, we're going to be right in front of each other, who can punch, and whose will would give in.
Especially at middleweight as well, where the two of them were at their absolute peak.
Two guys who really were only good at one weight, and once they moved, they'd never be good. Even though Pavlik was a big guy at the weight, he was proof that a higher weight. I mean, against Hopkins, he had nothing, and even his fights after Martinez when he was fighting super middleweight, he wasn't the same.
Yeah, I think Abraham was coming off that. Well, just before that fight with Taylor, actually, Abraham was coming off that vicious, evil knockout against that Mayer Urel. It was one with the kind of left uppercut in the base of the face. That was one of the most brutal knockouts you'll see.
Yeah, and Joe, we're talking about going back to Taylor, and you mentioned Abraham's knockout of Taylor. I think that seems to be like the start of the real downfall for Taylor, doesn't it? In terms of his personal life, I mean, he suffered like a really bad concussion in that fight with that knockout.
Abraham,
yeah, the Abraham fight, and Taylor. I remember reading at the time Taylor couldn't remember a thing leading into that fight, the fight itself. And you just wonder. I mean, especially that plus the knockouts to Frach and Pavlik, you wonder, has that affected him mentally? It probably has.
Yeah.
That's a good point, actually, because you guys have probably already mentioned this, I'm just remembering it now. Wasn't Taylor, there was some kind of brain damage there, and Lou DiBella didn't want to let him sanction to be fight, or something like that, wasn't there going on at the time?
DiBella walked away from him, yeah.
He had bleeding on the brain, didn't he?
It was after the Abraham knockout, because he had to withdraw from the tournament, and that was when I think it was
That's
Alan
right.
Green. I think Alan Green came into the tournament.
Yes, right, Andy. Alan Green fought Kessler, didn't they?
Yeah.
But I think with DiBella, I think he loved Jermain Taylor. I mean, DiBella had that, bit of fallout with Hopkins, and Jermain Taylor beating Hopkins was a kind of victory for DiBella, and DiBella used it against Hopkins, and he was really close. And when he walked away, he generally did it for the right reason. He couldn't be a part of Jermain fighting on because of this, because of how serious this was for him. And then years later, he worked with him again, and DiBella got a lot of criticism, which was rightly so, because for him to walk away and say, for a promoter to walk away, we know what they're like, because of a guy's, problems with his brain. I mean, that tells you everything. And when he came back, it was like, it was just a sad thing where a boxer again fighting on when, obviously, for whatever reason.
It's a bit hypocritical with DiBella, though, because did they know then say that, that Sergio Martinez was struggling in rehab before he fought Cotto, but you still allowed your guy to fight? But the simple fact is because they saved that $1.5 million payday, so I think it's slightly hypocritical of Lou DiBella.
Yeah, and when Taylor came back to fight Sam Solomon, I mean, there's that kind of startling photo of him, isn't there, that does the rounds on Twitter frequently? that glassy-eyed look. He's not all there, and it is sad to see. I mean, we mentioned, as we mentioned earlier on, this kid was nice humble guy from Arkansas, complete gentleman by all accounts, and this guy today just seems to be a danger to himself and society.
Unfortunately so, Dave. I think just final comments from me, just summing it up. I think we've said it all really, guys. Two troubled guys outside of the ring who just put it all on the line and gave us a fantastic spectacle inside the ring. I really did get a great deal of enjoyment going back and revisiting this fight. There's always something great about going back and watching these brilliant fights, and you remember them at the time. And I was saying earlier, actually, I can't believe it's going to be 10 years next year that this took place. It just seems like it was yesterday. And I think one thing that I would say at the end is, regarding Taylor, he'd put in a lot of lacklustre performances, and I think he just needed somebody to bring the fight out of him. That's exactly what Pavlik did. I mean, Taylor in the end ended up receiving the acclaim in defeat that he'd always been missing in victory to that point. So I'll just thank both of these guys. It was an excellent fight.
One more thing quickly as well. I think, as you mentioned, Jermain Taylor is not a boxing fan. He doesn't have any interest in the sport. He doesn't care about the sport. So I think for a lot of these troubled guys, boxing is something that they enjoy, something that they get them out of, whether it be the streets or gangs or, crime, whatever. But for Jermain Taylor, I don't think he ever had that, because the one thing that took him away from, the troubles is something that he didn't really care about. And it was to him, it was just a job, like everyone's normal job, his routine. To him, it wasn't enjoyment. And, it was only the payday at the end of it, which was probably the enjoyment. But the actual training for it and the fight itself, he didn't really care about. So for him, I don't know if he had outlet or he had friends around him, well, the right friends at that time to really help him out. And it's, where we see him where he is now. So it's just a sad all round.
I think Manny should have alluded to that, mate, as well, because it was, I think it was the build up to the first fight that I think they actually took training camp away into the Pokemon Mountains or something, because just a simple fact is, once Taylor came out the gym, he was just, his mind wasn't on boxing. If he was in seclusion, his mind was on boxing at least, for like 12 hours a day. You could sit down with him, show him some fights, go through some of the, he'd show him like Leonard against Hearns, for instance. We'll look at some of Pavlik's fights and stuff. Whereas, as you quite rightly say, he wasn't really, his heart, I don't think fully was really into boxing. He wasn't one of these guys who like studies fighters and live the life, so to speak.
Dave, anything you want to close with?
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to end on a somber note. As you mentioned, Steve, it'll be 10 years next year for the anniversary of this fight, and we mention it every episode, don't we? But it's definitely one you have to check out if you haven't seen it already. I mean, it's one of the great middleweight fights, and middleweight division, it's always been a favorite of mine, and it is for a lot of connoisseurs. And this fight done middleweight boxing proud. It's definitely one to check out.
Yeah, I think it definitely is one of the great middleweight fights, and certainly one that we've enjoyed. If there's any fights that you enjoy, then don't forget to drop us a line and tell us exactly what you want to hear on future episodes of Punches from the Past. Go along and watch this one on YouTube and tell us what you thought over on the Facebook page or over on Twitter. Tell us exactly what you thought about this fight, about the careers of Jermain Taylor and Kelly Pavlik, respectively. And check out our previous episodes as well. We've got 7 in the bag. This is number 8 as well. Another couple to go before we end the series. And thanks for everyone for listening. We do appreciate you taking the time to check out Punches from the Past, and we'll speak to you soon. Steve Wellings, Andy Patterson, Dave Lee and Kurt Ward off the panel. Thank you.